We all kind of want our villains to be, clearly labeled, don't we?
Oh, totally. We want the obvious bad guy.
Right. We want the bright colors, the heavy black ink, drawing a literal line between the good guys and the bad guys. It gives us this comforting certainty of knowing exactly who the monster is and who the victim is.
Yeah, but this show doesn't really let you have that comforting certainty, does it?
No, absolutely not. And that brings us to the really big question. What happens when the architect of the city's absolute worst monster dies on an operating table over, of all things, a glass of pineapple juice?
It just completely shatters that certainty. I mean, you are suddenly left looking at this moral landscape that is terrifyingly devoid of any boundaries.
Exactly. When the lines between past trauma and intentional manipulation and present-day survival just completely collapse, you get an hour of television that fundamentally rewires everything you thought you knew about a story.
It really does.
So, welcome to the deep dive. We are taking a really intense forensic look at the highly anticipated Daredevil, Born Again, Season 2, Episode 5.
Titled The Grand Design, which aired on April 14th, 2026.
Right, and this is an episode that just sent an absolute shockwave through the fan base.
Yeah.
So our mission today, the goal for this deep dive, is to figure out how a narrative that relied so heavily on flashbacks managed to completely recontextualize the entire mythology of the show.
And we also need to figure out exactly why the internet is still recovering from the emotional whiplash of that hospital sequence.
Oh, 100%. We have to talk about the hospital.
Yeah.
To navigate all this for you, we have a really fascinating stack of sources guiding our discussion today.
We do. We are pulling from a highly detailed scene-by-scene recap from the team over at Minute Media and Fansided.
And we are also digging into a very critical, heavily debated, and honestly kind of chaotic review from Joe George over at Den of Geek.
Which is a whole story in itself, but we'll get to that later.
Yes, we definitely will. And of course, because we have to take the pulse of the actual community watching this unfold, in real time, we're diving deep into the raw, unfiltered fan reactions from the r/Marvel Studios Reddit discussion thread.
We're going to look at the meticulous details the fandom caught, the wild theories they're spinning, and the absolute chaos that erupted when the credits rolled.
But before we get into the heavy thematic analysis and the deep psychology of these characters, let's just establish exactly where we are on the board.
Yeah.
The present day stakes for this episode are just as high as they can possibly get.
They really, really are. I mean, we pick up in the immediate chaotic aftermath of that brutal gym fight from the previous episode.
Right.
Vanessa Fisk is critical injured. Bullseye, or Dex, threw a shard of glass that struck her right in the side of the head.
Which is just a horrifying visual.
It is. So right out of the gate, the mayor of New York, Wilson Fisk, is entirely sidelined from his criminal and political empires. He is rushing his wife to the hospital.
Meanwhile, the men responsible for all that chaos are desperately trying to survive the fallout. Matt Murdock and Bullseye are on the run.
Yeah. Actively being hunted through the city by the anti-vigilante task force led by Powell.
It is a high-octane, desperate pursuit. But the brilliance of this episode, I think, is that it uses this moment of extreme, visceral, present-day crisis to just drop us straight down a well into the past.
It creates this fascinating narrative friction, doesn't it?
It really does.
While the physical bodies of our characters are, sprinting through alleys and bleeding in hospital beds, their minds are anchored a full decade in the past. They're wrestling with the decisions that led them to this exact bloody intersection.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can talk about the running and the hiding and the tactical maneuvers of the task force, we really have to examine the psychological anchor of this entire underworld.
We have to look at the waiting room.
Yes. Exactly. The waiting room. According to the fan-sided recap, the emotional anchor of this episode isn't the action at all. It's the agonizing stasis of Wilson Fisk.
Right. The nurses are frantically trying to stabilize Vanessa, and Fisk is in such a state of desperate panic that he literally has to be physically forced out of the way so the medical team can operate.
And the show does this brilliant thing where it juxtaposes Fisk's total paralysis with the frantic scrambling of his organization in the background.
Yeah, you have Daniel fielding an absolute onslaught of calls from the press.
And then you have Daniel's girlfriend, BB, sneaking into the hospital to leak insider information, which, by the way, introduces this whole secondary layer of betrayal.
But to Fisk, none of that matters. The entire world outside that surgical theater has just ceased to exist.
It's all static to him. He is a man reduced to a singular point of focus.
And eventually, the surgeon emerges and delivers that classic double-edged medical update. You know the one.
Oh yeah, that Vanessa is in a, quote, precarious position, unquote. But he remains optimistic about the surgery's outcome.
Which sets the audience up for a massive exhale. I mean, we've seen this trope a million times on television.
Right. The hero, or in this case the villain, waits agonizingly. The doctor gives a cautious thumbs up, and we move on to the recovery arc.
Exactly. And the show plays right into that expectation. Vanessa wakes up, Fisk is sitting there, and the relief radiating off of him is palpable.
She stirs, she reaches out, and they connect. But the mechanics of the scene immediately start signaling to you that something is profoundly wrong.
It starts with the pineapple juice.
The pineapple juice.
Yeah. She wakes up, seemingly lucid, and asks Fisk for pineapple juice.
Which is such a specific, jarring request. And Fisk's response is immediate confusion. He tells her, you don't even like pineapple juice.
Right, and from a neurological standpoint, this is a glaring red flag.
Oh, really? Tell me about that.
Well, in the context of traumatic brain injury, specifically penetrating trauma to the temporal or frontal lobes, sudden shifts in taste, or the articulation of desires that directly contradict long-held preferences, are classic signs of aphasia. Yeah. Or severe neurological misfiring. It's a tiny, mundane detail, right? A beverage preference. But it serves as an alarm bell for anyone paying attention to the mechanics of brain trauma.
But Fisk, who is just blinded by relief, just wants to give her what she wants. He orders a nurse to get it.
And then the scene settles into this quiet, deeply intimate moment. She asks him to tell her a story.
Specifically, she asks him to recount the story of how they first met at the art gallery. They share this soft laughter about the exorbitant amount of money he dropped on that famous avant-garde white painting.
Rabbit in a snowstorm.
Right, Rabbit in a Snowstorm. It feels like a moment of genuine connection and survival.
And then the neurological misfire escalates from a subtle oddity to a catastrophic failure.
It's awful to watch.
She looks at him, perfectly calm, and asks him to tell her a story. Again.
The glitch. It is terrifying to watch because of how quiet it is at first. She just repeats the exact same request, completely unaware that she just had a 5-minute conversation about it.
The recap really highlights that the shard of glass did far more invisible internal damage than the initial surgery could mitigate.
Yeah.
The repetition is the manifestation of her brain failing to form short-term memories. It's a loop closing in on itself, and from there the deterioration is rapid and brutal.
She begins to convulse. Her speech centers fail entirely. The monitors scream, the nurses flood the room, and despite all the frantic intervention, she flatlines.
It is a devastating sequence compounded by the audio design.
Oh, the audio design was incredible.
As she dies, the diegetic sound of the hospital, the alarms, the medical jargon, it all fades away, and the audio track is overtaken by the sound of beach waves.
Which specifically calls back to a vision she experienced while under anesthesia. This idyllic, dreamlike sequence of her and Fisk dressed in white standing on a beach.
It's the serene auditory backdrop playing over the absolute destruction of Wilson Fisk's soul.
Now, to truly understand the structural weight of this death, we have to bring in the analysis from the Den of Geek review.
Right, Joe George's review.
Yeah. He presents a fascinating thesis about the show's underlying architecture, which he terms the kingpin problem.
I found this concept incredibly compelling.
Same. So how exactly does Den of Geek define this kingpin problem?
The argument is essentially about narrative gravity. Vincent D'Onofrio's portrayal of Wilson Fisk is so massive, so layered, and so intensely compelling that he exerts this gravitational pull that threatens to swallow the rest of the show.
He really does steal every scene he's in.
He does. George argues that D'Onofrio plays Fisk like a, quote, wounded baby in the body of a giant, and because that performance is so defining, the show frequently has to contort itself to make the rest of the rogues gallery, and sometimes even the heroes, feel relevant in his presence.
It's the idea that a villain who is too charismatic, too psychologically complex, ends up hijacking the narrative focus. You tune in for Daredevil, but you end up dissecting the childhood trauma of the mob boss.
Precisely. But George goes further. He argues that this specific episode, The Grand Design, uses its flashbacks to retroactively reframe the entire series.
Stretching all the way back to the original Netflix run, right?
Yes. Reframing it not just as the Wilson Fisk story, but as a story where Wilson Fisk was, in many ways, an instrument of someone else's will. It completely redefines Vanessa.
Okay, yes. And this is where I need to really dig into the text with you, because this fundamentally shifts the ground beneath these characters.
It really does.
If we look back at the original series, the way Ayelet Zur initially played Vanessa, the subtext always seemed to be that she was a woman of refined taste who recognized the danger in Fisk, but was magnetically drawn to his vulnerability.
Yeah, that was the read for a long time.
She saw that wounded baby the reviewer mentioned, and her maternal protective instincts intertwined with her romantic attraction. She was drawn to the monster because she saw the broken man inside.
That was certainly the prevailing interpretation for years. But the Den of Geek review points out that the flashback in this episode dismantles that interpretation entirely.
Also,
Well, the episode takes us to a moment chronologically prior to their on-screen meeting in Season 1. We see Vanessa in the art gallery having a fierce argument with her boss.
right, over the rabbit in the snowstorm painting. The boss thinks the all-white canvas is pretentious, unsellable, or too avant-garde for their typical clientele.
But Vanessa fights tooth and nail to display it prominently. And the crucial revelation here isn't about her aesthetic appreciation for minimalist art.
No, it's about her psychological motivation.
Exactly. The episode heavily implies that Vanessa specifically curated that space and fought for that specific painting because she understood the psychological profile of the kind of man who would be drawn to an empty white canvas.
Wait, really? So she wasn't looking for a partner in the traditional sense? She was looking for a vessel.
The reviewer explicitly invokes the Lady Macbeth archetype here, which is a heavy analytical claim.
It is a heavy claim.
Right.
But let's look at the mechanics of that archetype. Lady Macbeth isn't the one swinging the sword. She is the psychological catalyst.
Right.
She identifies the raw ambition and capacity for violence in her husband, but she also sees his hesitation, his moral squeamishness. So she attacked his masculinity, she challenges his resolve, and she essentially provides the architectural blueprints for his bloody rise to power.
And that fits so well here.
Is Den of Geek arguing that Vanessa did this intentionally? That she sought out a powerful man who was a blank space, specifically so she could project her own dark ambitions onto him?
That is exactly the argument. The review suggests she wasn't a passive moth drawn to a flame. She was the person who built the lantern and struck the match.
Wow.
She wanted a man with the raw capital and physical power of a kingpin, but with a psychological void that she could fill with her own grand design.
Okay, I have to push back on this interpretation because it feels a little too neat, a little too retroactive.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Vanessa is this master manipulator, this brilliant architect who cultivated Wilson Fisk into the ultimate apex predator, how do we square that with her genuine terror in earlier seasons?
That's a fair question.
Remember when Fisk brutally decapitated Anatoly with a car door? Vanessa was visibly rattled. She required serious convincing to stay with him after seeing the visceral reality of his violence. If she's the architect holding the blueprints, why is she shocked when the building starts going up?
That's a vital counterpoint, and it gets to the heart of how complex this writing is. An architect can design a towering, brutalist skyscraper, but that doesn't mean they won't flinch when the dynamite detonates to clear the foundation.
That's a great analogy.
The argument isn't that Vanessa relished the blood on the pavement. The argument is that she wanted the power that the violence secured.
Ah, I see.
She wanted a man who could reshape the city, but she wanted to be the one whispering in his ear, pointing him toward the targets. Her fear in Season 1 wasn't necessarily a rejection of his nature. It was the shock of realizing how raw and unrefined the clay she had chosen actually was.
Okay, so her arc then became about refining that brutality into something elegant.
Yes.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. She didn't want a street thug who bashes heads with car doors. She wanted an emperor. And she spent the last decade teaching the street thug how to wear the crown.
Which makes the title of the episode, The Grand Design, take on a terrifying double meaning.
It's not just Fisk's design for the city. It's Vanessa's design for Fisk.
And that profound psychological enmeshment is why her death in that hospital bed is such a catastrophic, apocalyptic event for the narrative. He isn't just losing his wife, he is losing his author.
He is a golem who just watched the rabbi who placed the scroll in his mouth die.
Losing his author. That is a brilliant way to frame it.
And the audience felt the weight of that loss entirely through D'Onofrio's performance. The Reddit community, which is usually, hyper-focused on Easter eggs and plot mechanics, dedicated massive threads purely to analyzing his vocal control in this scene.
The shift in his voice is a masterclass in physical acting.
It really is. A Reddit user named Valor Pizzaris posted this incredibly perceptive comment. They said, "Oh man, when Vanessa woke up, we have never heard Fisk's voice like that, even in the entirety of the Netflix series." D'Onofrio really locked in that scene.
And it sparked a whole discussion about the mechanics of how D'Onofrio builds that character. Another user, RingtailVT, pointed out that during the breakdown, D'Onofrio's natural, real-life speaking voice bled through.
Which is significant, because for a decade, Wilson Fisk's voice has been characterized by that heavy, gravelly, almost suffocated grit.
Yeah, it's a voice that sounds like it's grinding against jagged rocks.
It is an intentional affectation, a vocal armor he wears to project menace and control.
But the moment Vanessa glitches, the armor shatters. He drops the kingpin grit entirely. He doesn't sound like the mayor of New York, and he doesn't sound like a crime boss.
He sounds like a completely ordinary, terrified man watching the only thing he cares about vanish.
User Oakoil378 noted that they fully expected him to fall back on his classic coping mechanism, that infamous monologue starting with, "When I was a boy."
Oh, right, because the trauma had reverted him to such a childlike state of panic. But he couldn't even manage that. He was just broken.
And the showrunners orchestrated this heartbreak brilliantly by weaponizing the audience's cynicism against them.
Yes, the pacing trap.
Exactly. The Reddit thread was full of people admitting they fell for the pacing trap.
User The Monkey's Uncle perfectly encapsulated this. They wrote, "They got me in the first half with Vanessa, and I was ready to complain with 3 minutes left in the episode, and then they hit us with the old switcheroo."
It's fascinating how modern television audiences consume media. We are so conditioned by plot armor and fake-out deaths.
Right, when she first woke up, a significant portion of the audience was likely rolling their eyes, thinking, of course she survived. The writers won't actually pull the trigger on a major character like this.
The show intentionally lulled the audience into a state of cynical complacency, allowing them to feel annoyed at the perceived lack of stakes, right before pulling the rug out and delivering a medically terrifying, irreversible death.
It's an incredibly cruel, incredibly effective storytelling technique. And while Fisk is enduring the absolute destruction of his emotional and psychological anchor in that hospital, we really have to transition across town.
Right, because Matt Murdock is desperately trying to establish a moral anchor of his own.
The structural contrast here is just staggering. Fisk's world is shrinking down to the size of a hospital bed, becoming totally static. Matt's world is expanding into a chaotic, hyperkinetic chase sequence.
But fundamentally, both men are wrestling with the ghosts of the people who define their morality.
Let's follow Matt and Dex. They are sprinting through alleys, desperately evading Powell and the task force.
They duck into the back of a restaurant kitchen, relying on the chaotic environment and the sympathetic kitchen staff to access a subterranean tunnel system. It's pure survival mode.
But amid this adrenaline-fueled escape, Matt's internal monologue is completely detached from the present. His mind is dragging him backward to a time long before he put on the horns.
He is flashing back to his earliest days as a lawyer. Which brings us to a moment that practically broke the internet with nostalgia, the return of Eldon Henson as Foggy Nelson.
You cannot overstate how deeply the fandom missed this dynamic. A user named SuperSeri1ET88 commented, "I almost forgot I was watching Born Again the moment I saw young Foggy."
Seeing Matt and Foggy back in the fluorescent misery of the district attorney's office, carrying those massive legal files, bickering over procedure, it felt like a warm blanket.
But the show isn't just serving nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. This flashback is doing heavy thematic lifting.
It's establishing the foundational jurisprudence of Matt Murdock. In the flashback, they are interns or junior ADAs dealing with a seemingly open and shut case.
The client is a man named Ray. And the show adds this brilliant grounding detail. Ray isn't just a random criminal. He is the older brother of a kid who used to mercilessly bully Foggy when they were growing up.
Which introduces an immediate, messy personal bias into the legal proceedings. Now, Ray is staring down a mandatory 5-year sentence for a combination of drug trafficking and weapons possession.
And Matt, operating purely on the math of the penal code, explains that with a plea deal and good behavior, they could probably knock it down to 3 years.
But Ray is absolutely terrified. He looks at these two young lawyers and flat out tells them that if he goes to Rikers or wherever they are sending him, he won't survive the week.
He has enemies inside. 3 years or 5 years, doesn't matter. It's the death sentence. He refuses to sign the plea.
Which forces Matt and Foggy back to the drawing board. Their supervising attorney is furious that they are wasting billable hours dragging out a simple possession
Well,
case.
or taxpayer dollars.
Right. But they start combing through the actual paperwork of the arrest. And this is where the plot hinges on a classic foundational concept of the American legal system, the exclusionary rule.
The famous fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine.
Exactly. Foggy discovers a clerical error. The police warrant that authorized the raid on Ray's property had the wrong address.
The cops wrote down 536 West 49th Street.
Because the address was incorrect, the judge who signed the warrant technically authorized a search of a different premises. Therefore, the search of Ray's actual apartment was an illegal search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment.
Wow.
And because the search was illegal, every piece of evidence found during that search, the drugs, the weapons, must be thrown out. It cannot be used in court.
A user named Johnny Lurker was cheering in the Reddit thread, noting, "There's nothing a lawyer loves more than seeing the cops make this kind of mistake."
And it's true. It's the ultimate defense attorney trump card.
But this clerical error sparks a profound philosophical debate between Matt and Foggy, one that gets to the very core of why the justice system works the way it does, and why vigilantes eventually feel compelled to step outside of it.
Matt looks at this situation through a lens of rigid rule utilitarianism. He says to Foggy, Ray is guilty. The drugs were there. The guns were there. He was contributing to the decay of the neighborhood.
He needs to face punishment to protect the community. We shouldn't let a guilty man walk free just because a cop transposed two numbers on a piece of paper.
It's a highly logical argument. The harm Ray caused is real. Why should a typo negate his responsibility?
But Foggy counters with a deeply humanistic, almost radical perspective on mercy. Foggy argues that the legal system is a machine, and if they feed Ray into that machine knowing it will result in his extrajudicial murder behind bars, they are morally complicit in his death.
Foggy is saying, essentially, I don't care about the guns or the drugs right now. I care that if we don't use this typo to save him, his blood is on our hands.
Foggy prioritizes the immediate preservation of a single human life over the abstract enforcement of community standards.
And Foggy doesn't just preach this philosophy. He literally bankrupts himself to enforce it. The judge throws the case out because of the invalid warrant. Ray walks free.
But Ray is still in danger on the streets. So later that night, Foggy goes to Ray's rundown apartment and hands him a thick envelope of cash.
And the devastating reveal is that this isn't just spare change. This is the seed money, the hard-earned savings, that Matt and Foggy had been carefully hoarding to start their own independent law firm.
Foggy takes their collective future, their dream of Nelson and Murdoch, and hands it to a criminal who is directly related to the person who tormented him as a child.
He does it so Ray can buy a bus ticket, skip town, and start over. It is an act of staggering, almost incomprehensible grace.
And Matt follows him there. He stands in the shadows and watches Foggy hand over their dream. Matt confronts him, but he isn't furious. He's bewildered. He asks Foggy why he would do it.
And Foggy simply states that he has to have faith that mercy can catalyze change. He believes that giving Ray a second chance, an unearned second chance, is worth the sacrifice.
This memory, this specific shining example of Foggy's unwavering belief in the redemption of the undeserving, is the precise psychological mechanism Matt is using to survive the present moment.
Because in the present timeline, Matt is trapped in a Catholic church with Bullseye. The task force has surrounded the building.
The priest, the same priest we saw earlier in the season, realizes the danger and betrays them, pointing the heavily armed task force toward their location. Matt and Dex retreat into a small, dark utility closet. The walls are literally closing in.
And Dex, in a moment that is wildly out of character for the chaotic assassin we know, suddenly demonstrates a bizarre sense of honor.
Right.
He looks at Matt, realizes the tactical disadvantage of dragging a wounded man out of a surrounded building, and tells Matt to leave him. He says, "Leave me, go."
And the camera lingers on Matt. For a terrifyingly long moment, Matt hesitates. He steps out of the closet. He looks toward the exit. He is fully prepared to abandon the man who murdered his best friend.
And from a logical standpoint, who could blame him? Leaving Bullseye for the cops resolves Matt's immediate physical danger, and it removes a mass murderer from the board without Matt having to break his own rule against killing. It is the cleanest, most rational choice.
But then, the ghost of Foggy Nelson steps in. The memory of Foggy handing that envelope of cash to Ray floods Matt's consciousness.
Foggy's radical, irrational mercy for the undeserving demands an answer.
So Matt stops. He turns around. He goes back into that dark closet. He hauls the bleeding mass of Bullseye over his shoulder, and he carries his worst enemy out of the church to safety.
It is a breathtaking resolution to the thematic debate. A Reddit user named BigBonkMan23 crystallized this perfectly, writing, "Matt's Catholic guilt is his real superpower."
I thought about that comment for days.
Wow.
It's so incisive. Matt doesn't save Dex because he has suddenly developed a soft spot for him.
Right.
He doesn't save him because he thinks Dex is a good person who is misunderstood. He certainly doesn't save him because it's tactically smart. Matt saves Bullseye solely to honor the ghost of Foggy's mercy.
He forces his body to carry the physical weight of his enemy because his soul cannot bet the spiritual weight of letting Foggy's philosophy die in that church.
It's the ultimate expression of how deeply these characters shape each other. And we really have to pause here to acknowledge Charlie Cox's performance.
Oh, absolutely.
Pulling off this internal conflict requires tremendous subtlety. Another Reddit user, your Mindux, observed that Cox's physical acting as the younger Matt in the flashback is entirely distinct from his present-day performance.
Yes. The posture, the cadence, everything.
Exactly. 13 years ago, Matt was lighter. His shoulders weren't hunched with the weight of 100 brutal beatings and a dozen moral compromises.
He moved with the arrogance of a young lawyer who thought the law could actually solve the world's problems. Cox must have meticulously reviewed his own footage from the first season of the Netflix show to recapture that specific, untarnished energy.
Contrasting it sharply with the exhausted, world-weary vigilante dragging a killer through a church today. The fandom absolutely devours those micro details, just like they loved the surreal, almost absurd realism injected into the flashbacks.
User Solo13508 pointed out how incredibly jarring it was to have Matt and Foggy engaging in a casual, highly specific conversation about feet while reviewing case files.
Yeah, that was wild. Or the pure, fist-pumping joy Johnny Lurker felt watching Foggy, quote, giving his bully his allowance as an adult and making it look so damn cool.
It grounds the mythological weight of the superhero narrative in the awkward, mundane reality of two guys trying to figure out their lives.
It creates a necessary baseline of humanity. But that baseline makes the transition to our next topic incredibly jarring. Because while Matt is operating on a philosophy of inherited grace and interconnected responsibility, the man he is physically carrying over his shoulder operates on a completely opposed ideology.
We have to look closely at Dex. We have to examine the nihilism of Bullseye.
Yes, let's dive into the ideological foil of this episode. While Matt believes every action ripples through eternity, Dex claims to believe that absolutely nothing matters.
Throughout this massive evasion sequence from the restaurant kitchen to the church pews, Dex is engaged in this running monologue that acts as a dark mirror to Matt's internal struggle.
Dex starts talking about the concept of balance. Remember, he is the one who threw the glass that is currently killing Vanessa Fisk.
And he rationalizes this not as an act of passion or even tactical necessity, but as an act of cosmic accounting. He tells Matt that if Vanessa dies, it simply balances the scales, because Vanessa was the one who originally ordered the hit on Foggy Nelson.
It's a terrifyingly cold, transactional view of human life. A life for a life, a pawn for a pawn until the ledger reads zero. But he pushes it even further.
While they're catching their breath in the church, surrounded by all this religious iconography, Dex articulates a philosophy of absolute bleak nihilism.
He tells Matt that none of this matters. Killing innocent people, saving guilty people, prosecuting cases as a lawyer, taking lives as an assassin to Dex, it's all white noise.
He argues that people are simply biological machines acting out their programming, and no intervention, no matter how heroic or horrific, changes the fundamental emptiness of the universe.
Okay, this is where I have to ask you to psychoanalyze his character, because I see a massive contradiction here.
I'm listening.
Is Dex genuinely a nihilist who believes in the absolute void of meaning? Or is this an elaborate defense mechanism? Is he just saying these things to get under Matt's skin to mock his Catholic guilt? Because here's my problem. If you truly, deeply believe that nothing matters, why are you so utterly obsessed with balancing the scales? The very concept of a scale, of a ledger that needs to be balanced, implies that actions do possess weight.
That is an incredibly astute observation, and it cuts to the core of Bullseye's pathology. You're right, he isn't a true philosophical nihilist. He is a structuralist desperately pretending to be a nihilist.
A structuralist pretended to be a nihilist. That makes sense.
True nihilism, passive nihilism, results in apathy. Dex is the furthest thing from apathetic. His obsession with the scales, his rigid, almost mathematical need to equate Vanessa's death with Foggy's death, reveals a deeply disordered mind desperately craving a framework. He needs the universe to have rules, even if those rules are entirely dictated by bloodshed.
So he uses the language of nihilism as a shield.
Exactly. He claims total detachment because admitting that he cares about the structure, admitting that he needs the ledger to balance to quiet the noise in his own head, would make him vulnerable.
He is the ultimate foil to Matt. Matt operates on hyper-responsibility, believing his guilt can save the world. Dex operates on forced detachment, believing his violence can order the world.
And yet both are fundamentally driven by an inability to accept the chaos of human existence.
Which perfectly explains why Dex is so willing to just sit in that utility closet and let the task force execute him. When the priest gives them up, Dex doesn't fly into a rage. He doesn't panic. He just looks at Matt and says, "I've earned this many times over."
He accepts his fate with this bizarre, distorted sense of honor. He recognizes that his own death balances a tremendous amount of weight on his personal ledger, and he is ready to close the book.
And in typical fashion, the Reddit community found the absolute darkest humor possible in this deeply psychological standoff.
Oh, the Reddit thread regarding the closet scene was incredible. User Galahad the Ranger posted this hilarious summary of the dynamic. They said, "Dude just wants a cool bleed-out scene, but Matt keeps stealing his aura."
Stealing his aura. It's such a perfect distillation of the dynamic. Dex is trying to orchestrate this dramatic, cinematic conclusion to his life, a stoic surrender to the void.
And Matt is just like, "Absolutely not. I have a theological point to prove. You're coming with me."
Another user, TrueGuardian15, called Dex's resignation the masculine urge to bleed out somewhere quiet. It's so funny because it highlights how much Dex views his own life as a performance of detachment, and Matt's relentless, sweaty desperation completely ruins the aesthetic of his chosen death.
But Matt's theological victory creates a massive, immediate logistical nightmare because Matt successfully drags Bullseye out of the church, evades the task force, and manages to transport him to his safe house.
But it's not just any safe house. As the fan-sided recap notes, Matt brings him to Frank Castle's secret hideout.
The Punisher's Armory, which is currently occupied by none other than Karen Page, who is using the space to train.
And we cannot overstate the tension here. Karen Page has a profound, deeply traumatized history with Dex. He stalked her, he terrorized her, and he murdered her colleagues. She absolutely despises him.
And the production team embedded a tiny, brilliant Easter egg for the viewers who utilize closed captioning. Reddit user Mike Sharp caught this, and it immediately went viral on the sub.
What was it?
When Matt kicks the door open, dragging the bleeding, semi-conscious body of the man who tormented her into her sanctuary, the official closed captions simply read, bracket, size and annoyance, close bracket.
Oh my God, that is the most flawlessly understated character reaction imaginable. You're standing in an underground bunker, your vigilante best friend drags a bleeding mass murderer across your threshold, and your immediate reaction isn't a scream of terror, it's the deep, exhausted sigh of a woman who is just so unbelievably tired of the men in her life making terrible decisions.
It's the sigh of someone who knows she now has to bleach the floorboards.
Redditor Floppy Show Taco, who was an absolute goldmine of commentary in this thread, boldly predicted where this is heading. They wrote, "Karen's going to shoot Dex herself."
And honestly, considering the environment they're in, surrounded by Castle's arsenal, you wouldn't blame her.
But before we move away from the hideout, there was a tiny, specific request Matt made that set off alarm bells across the entire fandom. As Matt drops Dex, he looks at Karen and says he urgently needs a, what was the exact phrasing?
He says, "I need a nurse."
A nurse. Not a doctor, not medical supplies, a nurse. The capitalization in the Reddit thread was deafening. User Velar Pizzerios was essentially screaming through their keyboard. They wrote, "I'm sorry, Matt, you said it in your SE."
And Delete Andrew Wang chimed in, pointing out that seeing Rosario Dawson would be a real shocker.
It's a masterstroke of fan engagement. By using that specific noun, the writers instantly activate a decade of embedded lore. They are heavily implying the return of Claire Temple, the night nurse, who was the connective tissue for the entire original street-level universe.
It signals to the audience that the show isn't just referencing the past. It's actively reassembling the old infrastructure.
And speaking of reassembling the old infrastructure, while Matt and Karen are dealing with the bleeding physical reality of their enemies in the city, Wilson Fisk's lieutenants are dealing with the messy logistical reality of his empire out in the woods.
This brings us to a massive thematic contrast the episode sets up. We need to talk about the underworld machinations, specifically the devastating juxtaposition of how Fisk operated in the past versus how he operates today. We need to talk about James Wesley and Buck.
Let's begin in the past, with the flashback that elicited some of the loudest cheers from the audience. The shock return of Toby Leonard Moore as James Wesley, Fisk's original, impeccably tailored right-hand man.
User Figgity Jones summed up the collective reaction perfectly. They said, "Holy hell, I did not expect to see Wesley again. It was a genuine, delightful surprise."
And what's brilliant is how efficiently the script uses his limited screen time to weave massive plot threads together.
In the flashback, Wesley is the one fielding the operational problems. He gets a phone call regarding Ray, the same Ray that Foggy gave the startup money to. Wesley calmly assures Fisk that he will handle the loose end.
So Wesley picks up the phone to contract a hitman, and the man he calls to execute Ray is none other than Buck.
Buck, the terrifying, silent enforcer who is currently running Fisk's security detail in the present day.
Exactly. We see Buck arrive at Ray's apartment, weapon drawn, ready to execute him. But, of course, the apartment is empty because Foggy already gave Ray the envelope of cash to flee. The hit fails, but the narrative connection is permanently forged.
We see the origin of Buck's utility to the organization. But more importantly, the flashback drops a seemingly throwaway line of dialogue that recontextualizes the entire mythology. Wesley mentions, almost in passing, that he was the one who initially directed Wilson Fisk toward Vanessa's art gallery.
Yes. When I heard that, I immediately thought of the Den of Geek review. If Vanessa is the master architect, the Lady Macbeth manipulating the blank canvas of Fisk, how does Wesley fit into that?
Reddit user Solo13508 caught this detail and spun a brilliant theory. They wondered if Wesley, with his intense, almost obsessive dedication to optimizing Fisk's life, had previously met Vanessa.
Did Wesley recognize her ambition? Was Wesley secretly playing matchmaker, aligning the raw power of his boss with the sophisticated cruelty of the art curator?
It introduces a fascinating layer of organizational conspiracy. It suggests that the Kingpin wasn't just a man, he was a project jointly cultivated by his most loyal employee and his future wife.
But the core analytical takeaway, as highlighted by the Den of Geek review, is the stark contrast between the eras. The reviewer notes that in Season 1, Kingpin was a myth. He was an urban legend.
He existed in the shadows, entirely insulated from the grid of the street by the elegant, bureaucratic orchestration of James Wesley. Wesley was the velvet glove over the iron fist.
You didn't even say Fisk's name out loud back then. You spoke to Wesley, and Wesley made things happen with quiet phone calls and impeccably polite threats.
But look at the present day. Fisk is the mayor of New York. He is fully exposed, existing under the blinding lights of public scrutiny. He can no longer operate as a myth.
And his new regime reflects that exposure. It is stripped of elegance, the velvet glove is gone, and the new regime is defined entirely by the blunt force traumatic brutality of Buck.
Let's analyze exactly how that blunt force trauma manifests, because the sequence with Buck and Daniel is one of the most stressful pieces of television I've watched in years.
So we know Daniel's girlfriend, Bibi, leaked the name of Vanessa's hospital to the press. The hospital lobby is swarming with reporters. One particularly aggressive journalist bypasses security and physically corners Daniel, demanding a statement.
And out of nowhere, Buck materializes. He physically intimidates the reporter, creating a wall between Daniel and the press. He tells Daniel, "Let's take a ride." He essentially saves him from the media mob.
It operates under the guise of an extraction, but the cinematography and the pacing immediately code it as an abduction.
Absolutely. They get in the car, and Buck just starts driving. And driving. He bypasses the safe houses, he bypasses the city limits, and he casually mentions they're heading up toward Albany. The atmosphere in that vehicle is suffocating.
Reddit user Mershellens posted a reaction meme in the thread that was just a picture of someone gripping the armrests of a chair, captioned, "Me," during this car ride. The audience knew exactly what was happening even before Daniel did.
While they are driving, Buck initiates this chilling, seemingly casual interrogation. He starts talking about loyalty, about the bonds forged in blood. He specifically brings up his own past, his deployment with Regiment 22 in Afghanistan.
And through this quiet, menacing monologue, Buck makes it abundantly clear that he knows Daniel is the leak. He knows Daniel is the reason the press found out about his military history.
Daniel, sweating through his suit, denies everything. He is desperate to maintain the facade.
But Buck just pulls the car over at an isolated hardware store. He orders Daniel to wait in the passenger seat. We watch from Daniel's terrified perspective as Buck walks into the brightly lit store and emerges a few minutes later carrying two very specific items, a long-handled shovel and a handsaw.
He tosses them in the back, gets back in the driver's seat, and they drive deep into a heavily forested area outside Albany.
It is pure psychological horror. Daniel completely breaks down. He knows this is an execution. He is pleading, crying, promising he will vanish, he will change his name, he will never speak to Bibi or the press again.
Buck ignores the pleading. He stops the car in the middle of nowhere. He orders Daniel out, and Buck delivers this horrifying thesis statement about their organization.
He tells Daniel that they work for a man who has the power to change the world, to remake the city, but that kind of power requires absolute, unshakable loyalty. It requires complicity. And then Buck pops the trunk.
Revealing a dead body. Not Daniel's grave, but someone else's.
A dead body. And Buck turns to Daniel, holding the tools he just bought, and asks him a simple, horrific question. Would you prefer to use the shovel or the handsaw?
We have to unpack the psychology of this specific choice. Buck isn't just telling Daniel to dispose of evidence, he is initiating a trauma bond.
The choice between the shovel and the handsaw is deeply insidious. The shovel represents exhausting, back-breaking labor, digging a 6-foot hole in the frozen earth to bury the body whole.
The handsaw represents something far more intimate, visceral, and unspeakably violent, dismembering the corpse for easier disposal. Buck is forcing Daniel to choose how he wants to lose his soul.
By making Daniel actively participate in the desecration and concealment of a corpse, Buck ensures that Daniel can never go to the police. He is permanently, legally, and spiritually bound to the cartel.
It's an initiation rite disguised as a punishment. As Floppy Shell Taco commented on Reddit again, the MVP of this discussion thread, they said, "This entire series is a long, slow burn leading to Daniel's inevitable death from his own stupidity."
And while that's a harsh assessment, it recognizes that Daniel just crossed a threshold from which there is no return. He is no longer a PR guy. He is an accomplice to murder.
And it perfectly validates the Den of Geek Review's analysis of the shifting empire. James Wesley maintained loyalty through financial incentives, blackmail, and the illusion of corporate structure. Buck maintains loyalty by marching you into the woods and making you saw a human being into pieces. The organization has rotted from the inside out.
And what I find so fascinating about how the show is constructed is how it balances this suffocating darkness with moments of incredibly mundane, bizarre reality. The world building relies on these jarring tonal shifts.
The Reddit thread had a field day with the dialogue choices in the flashback.
They really did. User Solo13508 pointed out the whiplash, writing Fisk and Wesley talking about Bitcoin quickly, followed by Matt and Foggy discussing feet, was definitely not on my born-again bingo card.
And user The Governess 1998 jokingly lamented Wesley died before he could tell Fisk about NFTs.
It sounds absurd, but it's an incredibly effective writing technique. When you are dealing with operatic themes, superheroes, vigilantes, mayors running secret assassination squads, philosophical debates about utilitarianism, the narrative risks floating away into total fantasy, you have to anchor the opera to the pavement.
By having Wesley and Fisk discuss the burgeoning market of Bitcoin in a 2013 flashback, the writers are tethering these mythological figures to our actual lived timeline. It makes the threat they pose feel tangible because they exist within the same economic reality as the audience.
It makes the world feel incredibly lived in. But as we transition to our final segment, it's worth noting that keeping track of all these intricate timelines, the character histories, the economic realities, and the philosophical callbacks requires an immense amount of cognitive energy from the audience.
And when an audience invests that deeply into a fictional world, the lines between reality and fiction can start to blur, leading to absolute chaos in the real world. We have to talk about the meta-narrative. We have to talk about the fandom, the frantic policing of spoilers, and the bizarre discrepancies within our own sources today.
This is where the structural reality of modern television production collides violently with digital fandom culture. If you were analyzing our sources with the same forensic intensity that we applied to the episode, you would have noticed a glaring contradiction right at the top of the hour.
A massive discrepancy. If you pull up the official r/Marvel Studios Reddit discussion thread, which is typically the most meticulously curated, community-policed archive of information, the credits for this episode are clearly listed. The thread states the episode was directed by the duo Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, and written by Dario Scardapane, Chris Ord, and Matt Corman.
Which aligns with the overarching showrunner credits for the season.
But if you navigate over to the Den of Geek Review, a professional, commercially published critique by Joe George, the opening paragraph explicitly states that this specific episode, The Grand Design, was written by Jesse Wigato and directed by Angela Barnes.
So how does a professional publication completely misattribute the creative team behind a flagship television episode? What is happening here?
What you are seeing is the mussy, often opaque machinery of the entertainment industry's press cycle. Professional reviewers are frequently granted access to screeners, advance copies of the episodes provided by the network weeks before the public premiere.
However, These screeners are often unfinished. They might be rough cuts, they might have temporary audio tracks, and crucially, they're often delivered with preliminary or bundled press packets that contain inaccurate credit sheets.
Sometimes episodes are reordered late in the post-production process. The reviewer likely drafted their critique based on a press packet that attributed the episode to Wigato and Barnes, completely unaware that the final aired version on Disney Plus credited a different team.
It highlights how chaotic the pipeline is from the editor's bay to our living rooms. But that logistical chaos was absolute nothing compared to the sociological chaos that unfolded in the comment section of that Den of Geek review. I spent an hour reading through it, and it was like stumbling into a digital war zone.
It serves as a fascinating anthropological case study of modern fandom.
It really does. So the inciting incident for this digital riot was a colossal editorial mistake. Apparently, in the initial published version of Joe George's review for Episode 5, he accidentally included a massive narrative-shattering spoiler for Episode 6.
The fallout was so intense that Alec Bojalad, the managing editor of Den of Geek, had to personally intervene. He pinned a public apology to the top of the comment section, explaining that the spoiler was likely a result of the reviewer misremembering from the order of events presented in the advanced press screeners, and confirmed that the spoiler had been scrubbed from the text.
Which, again, validates the theory about the messy screener process. But it also demonstrates the explosive volatility of the audience. A single misplaced sentence in a review threatens to ruin the carefully constructed architecture of the show, and the community responds with immediate hostility.
But the spoiler apology was just the appetizer. Deeper in the comment section, I discovered what I can only describe as the imposter saga. There was a Den of Geek staff member or frequent contributor named Chris Kilby who became embroiled in a multi-paragraph, incredibly heated feud with the commenters.
The digital identity theft subplot.
Exactly. Chris Kilby was frantically trying to explain to furious readers that a drive-by troll, an obvious, drooling, rabid nutcase, had actively cloned his user profile. This troll had stolen his avatar, copied his handle, and spent the weekend flooding the comment sections of entirely unrelated articles, specifically Star Trek reviews, with vile hate speech and inflammatory bait, all masquerading as Kilby.
Kilby was furious, not just at the troll, but at the site moderators for failing to catch the IP discrepancy fast enough.
And because the moderation failed, the community turned on the real Chris Kilby.
Yes. Other users, including one commenter that Kilby derisively referred to as the Woke Finder General, began aggressively attacking the real Kilby, genuinely believing he was the author of the troll's vitriol. It was a complete breakdown of digital trust, playing out in real time under review of a superhero show.
And what makes this so fascinating from an anthropological perspective is how quickly the hostility transmuted into the absurd.
It devolved into the most bizarre, intensely British conversational tangent I have ever read. After paragraphs of accusing each other of bigotry and trolling, Kilby and another user named Serenity Falls somehow de-escalated the situation and began bonding over their shared history of consuming terrible, cheap alcohol in their youth.
They literally pivoted from a debate about identity theft to a heated argument about the superiority of Tiger Bread and the physical toll of drinking MD 2020.
For context, MD 2020, or Mad Dog, is an infamous, highly fortified, syrupy, cheap wine that is practically a rite of passage for teenagers looking to get sick in a park.
Exactly. Kilby was regaling the comment section with a vivid story about drinking an orange and a green kiwi bottle of MD 2020 back-to-back, which resulted in him spontaneously, quote, teleporting the contents of my stomach.
It is deeply absurd, but it highlights a profound truth about how we interact with media. So, why am I dedicating time to telling you, the listener, about Chris Kilby's stomach lining and the flavor profile of MD 2020? I want you to step back and reflect on the ecosystem of modern media consumption.
Why do fans become so fiercely protective of spoilers? Why do they enmesh their own digital identities so deeply into comment sections that a cloned avatar feels like a profound personal violation?
Why do they transition from debating the ethical philosophy of a fictional blind lawyer to recounting their own adolescent vomiting stories?
Because the emotional investment is entirely real, we return to the kingpin problem proposed by the reviewer. The architecture of these stories, the meticulous world building, the theological debates, the psychological depth of characters like Vanessa and Matt demands a massive intellectual and emotional buy-in from the audience.
Shows like this reward the learner. They reward you for paying attention to the intricate, woven tapestry of the universe. When you notice that the address on the warrant was 536 West 49th Street, or when you remember that Vanessa specifically asked for a white painting, Or when you catch the closed captioning sigh of Karen Page, the show makes you feel like an active participant in the narrative.
You aren't just watching a story, you are co-inhabiting a world. And when that world is threatened, whether by a sloppy editorial spoiler that ruins the surprise, or by a malicious troll polluting the communal space where fans gather to dissect the lore, the community revolts, they are defending their investment. The passion they feel for the fiction bleeds directly into their reality.
The fandom mirrors the intensity of the text. Just as Matt Murdock fights to protect the legacy of Foggy Nelson's mercy, the fans fight to protect the integrity of the narrative experience.
They really do. And what a dense, relentlessly intense narrative experience this episode was. Let's pull the camera back and look at the tapestry we've unraveled today.
We witnessed a profound shift in the power dynamics of New York. The tragic, medically terrifying death of Vanessa Fisk didn't just break Wilson Fisk's heart. It removed the architect of his empire.
We watched Matt Murdock wrestle with the ghost of Foggy Nelson, ultimately choosing to shoulder the physical and spiritual weight of his greatest enemy, proving that radical mercy can survive even in the darkest corners of a church closet.
We saw the horrifying evolution of the criminal underworld, moving from the quiet, bureaucratic elegance of James Wesley to the visceral, handsaw-wielding trauma-bonding of Buck in the woods of Albany.
The scales are completely, utterly unbalanced. The physical and moral boundaries of Hell's Kitchen have collapsed. And as our favorite Reddit user Floppy Shell Taco put it with perfect blunt accuracy, Kingpin Crash Out is going to be legendary. The city is about to face a monster who no longer has an author guiding his hand.
But as we anticipate the fallout in Episode 6, we have to consider the long-term structural implications of everything we've analyzed today.
Yes, and that brings us to our final thought. I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering question to ponder long after this deep dive concludes. Think back to the metaphor we used at the very beginning of the episode. We talked about the sculptor and the clay. We talked about the architect and the blueprint.
The grand design.
Exactly. If the Den of Geek review is correct, if Vanessa Fisk was truly the artist who deliberately selected a blank, powerful canvas and purposefully painted Wilson Fisk into the terrifying kingpin of New York to serve her own ambitions, what happens to a painting when the artist suddenly dies?
Does the art remain frozen, permanently locked into the shape she intended for it? Or, without her guiding hand, without her specific refining interpretation, does that massive blank canvas simply begin to indiscriminately absorb all the darkness and violence around it until nothing but an unthinking monster remains? Keep a very close eye on how Wilson Fisk operates in the coming episodes. Is he meticulously honoring her grand design, or is the wounded baby finally painting his own masterpiece in blood?
That is the psychological question that will define the survival of every character left on the board.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the media you consume, keep looking for the hidden architecture behind the story, and we will see you next time.